built over 10,000. It was the most used transport aircraft during the Second World War. That was built in 1942 for the American Air Force. It was then handed over to the Canadians, who used it throughout the war up until 1971. The aircraft are flown by serving RAF pilots, and they do it on a voluntary basis. They do it in their own free time. The fighter pilots that we have here that fly the Spitfires and the Hurricanes, most of them are from here, from Coningsby. They're Tornado and Typhoon pilots, and if they want to fly these historic aeroplanes, they have to start from scratch. They go right back to basics. We've got two Chipmunks here, two training aircraft, and they have to do 25 hours on the Chipmunk. Now these are pilots with over 2,000 hours on Typhoons. So these are some of the guns used by the RAF during the Second World War. The gun at the top is a Colt Browning. It's an American weapon built under license in the United Kingdom during the Second World War. And that was the gun used during the Battle of Britain on our Spitfires, Hurricanes, and it was the weapon of choice on the Lancaster bomber. Doesn't look very much, does it? And that actually dates right back to the 1890s. That's when that was designed, in 1890. So that would have been used during the First World War, and certainly during the Second World War, and it was a standard issue to infantry during the Second World War. Then we come to this one, much more effective. Not available to us during the early part of the Second World War in 1940, when the Battle of Britain took place. That weapon would have been used mostly by the Americans during the Second World War to protect their bombers, their B-17 bombers and flying fortresses. Then we come to this beast, a 20mm cannon, much more effective. With this beast, low probability that you would hit an aircraft, but if you hit it, high probability it would be fatal. That's the shell, it's not a bullet. That would be filled with high explosive or incendiary. The Mark V was the first Spitfire to successfully use that cannon. 1941, 1 year after the Battle of Britain. The enemy also had this weapon, and they used it to good effect against our Lancaster bombers. So the first Spitfire to use that would be 1941. But the enemy had that aircraft, had that fitted to their Messerschmitt 109s during the Battle of Britain. So they were firing that at us during the Battle of Britain, and we were returning fire with that. Not fair, was it? And we were outnumbered 4-1 aircraft-wise, and we're still here. So they're the guns. This is, of course, the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, and it's the engine that won us the Battle of Britain, without a doubt. So without this engine, none of this would have been possible. Forget the Dakota, that's an American engine, that's a Pratt & Whitney Twin Wasp. The Dakota, but this powered most of our RAF aircraft. Not just RAF aircraft, but American aircraft as well. Most of the power comes from that big lump at the back, the supercharger. Basically that just forces air and fuel into the engine under pressure, like your turbo on your car. That allows the engine to have as much power up there in thin air as it does down here at low level, forcing air and fuel into the engine. And it was due to the supercharger mostly that they could increase the power of this engine. This is the Griffin, the big brother. This is 2,000 horsepower as it sits here now. So the main difference apart from the power is that one tractor's right, the propeller turns in a clockwise direction, this anti-clockwise. And if you're a pilot, you really need to know that, because if you're parked at the end of the runway with your brakes on, ready to take off, and you apply full power, it's got a tendency to try and pull you off the runway. This is, of course, a Hawker Hurricane. This was the backbone of fighter command in the early part of the war, certainly during the Battle of Britain. Without this aircraft, we would have been in a pickle in 1940. Backbone. Not as famous as the Spitfire by any means. In fact, they had a huge fly past at the end of the Second World War, and they didn't even include the Hurricane. Now the Hurricane was responsible for bringing down more enemy aircraft during the Battle of Britain than the Spitfire. As far as the aircraft is concerned, it was a much more stable gun platform than the Spitfire. Because of its thick wings, they could position the guns together. Nice wide undercarriage. It was quick to turn around, which was important during the Battle of Britain. They could turn this aircraft around in 7 minutes, refuel it and rearm it in 7 minutes. So this one has just been serviced, just been away to Duxford to be serviced, and it took them 2.5 years to service this aircraft. Now painted to represent an aircraft of 43 Squadron, Southeast Asia. If you notice the roundel, they removed the red from the centre in order not to confuse it with Japanese aircraft. So, the mighty Spitfire. So this was used during the Battle of Britain, built in 1940. It's a Mark II Spitfire, and this was built at Castle Bromwich, number 14. 23,000 Spitfires were built during the Second World War in 24 marks and 5 different wing variations. So you can see the thin wing on this aircraft, typical of an aircraft, an early Spitfire. See how difficult it would have been to fit that cannon to this wing. The Mark IX was known as the ultimate Spitfire. Very powerful, well armed, manoeuvrable. So it was the second most produced Spitfire. 5,000 of these would have been produced. It would have been bare metal, and it wouldn't have been silver, it would have been bare metal. And it was used in the Italian campaign in daylight ground attack raids, dive bombing. It was thought that camouflage-wise, it wouldn't have been seen so easily being bare metal in the bright Italian sunlight. Only 2 in the world flying. The other one's in Canada. There are plenty in museums, but only 2 flying. Came into service in 1942, and at that time, no other heavy bomber could carry the bomb load or had the range that this aircraft had. It could carry almost its own weight in bombs. So this enabled us in 1940 to turn the war around. So we started bombing Germany, and this is the aircraft that allowed us to do that. And it's an aircraft of 617 Squadron, dambusters. Every time it goes away, it will represent another famous Lancaster bomber. So, crew of 7. We're lucky here because one of our tour guides was a Lancaster pilot. Now, once reaching a target area, the bomb aimer would be the most important member of the crew. He would be telling the pilot what he wanted him to do. Hold it steady, left a bit, right a bit, hold it, no, go round again, not happy. Bomb aimers were very, very capable people. Most of the bomb aimers were failed pilots. It has 2 dual controls fitted to it now. We have a co-pilot, but during the Second World War it would have been for the pilot to fly the aircraft and monitor all the equipment on this aircraft. So they took away a lot of that responsibility and introduced the flight engineer. He would stand alongside the pilot. So after takeoff, the flight engineer would be responsible for all adjustments on throttles, boosts, pitches on the propellers, hydraulic systems, landing gear. So the flight engineer, very important guy. Navigator, very bright indeed. They also had to have a good knowledge of astronavigation. So if you look, just behind the cockpit area, there's a bubble on top. That's the astrodome.
All right.
So he would stand up there with his sextant to get a fix on stars. So very bright people. So behind the navigator would be the wireless operator. That's what he would look like, the wireless operator. Also very bright. It often took longer to train a wireless operator than any other member of the crew. He had to be able to receive and send Morse at least 20 words a minute. And that was encrypted Morse. So very bright people indeed. And it was just as difficult to become aircrew then as it is now.